Well, hello there. We finished The Empire Strikes Back in terms of the initial cues. It's taken not quite a year, but quite a few months to do. And I'm now revisiting aspects of that work. And one thing that occurred to me was it might be quite enjoyable to revisit fanfares. Um, just apropos of nothing really, other than the fact I heard the Gordon Jacob fanfare recently at the coronation of Charles, King of England, and various other bits. Anyway, and it just sort of got me thinking because my old teacher Joe was taught by Gordon Jacob and Nadia Boulanger, and I also thought, well, okay, that's interesting. Well, the sort of rather than look at the American national anthem, I thought it might be quite nice to look at Aaron Copland's fanfare for the common man, just because it's just so iconic. And also they've got a teacher in common as well, so I'm kind of interested in sort of revisiting that aspect. So Copland was also taught by Boulanger as well, Nadia Boulanger. So I thought we'd have a look at it. I've got sort of some of the Ots of Music online. I hope they don't mind me just briefly sort of going into it a little bit. I didn't realise there was a interesting documentary about Gordon Jacob, directed by Ken Russell in the 1950s, who says this: I personally feel that the day that melody is discarded, you may as well pack up music altogether, which definitely shows his sort of reticence with modernism, as opposed to Copland, who was rather different in that. And we'll come on to Mr. Copland in a bit. But I thought let's just sort of analyse it. It's a really powerful introduction, and it's very much a traditional fanfare. This is the one that's just done before the national anthem, British national anthem, which is in G major. However, it doesn't really start like that, and it starts with sort of a no chord. So here we start with the third degree of the scale. So interesting one, but it's actually quite ambiguous. So that could be the tonic, but then it goes down to B major as the initial idea. Just noticing a couple of typos here. It's quite strange. So if it was B major, then it's sort of tonic, then goes down to a flat 6, then 4, then 1. It's a sort of almost tertiary or tertial chord progression, but not quite. More of the fact, if it was G 3 1 6 3, then it really is tertial. So there are various ways of sort of working this out, and also just in terms of the root notes, it has that sort of span of going from B back to B via this sort of tertial idea. It's also got the classic sort of thing of having, 3 different note values to make a decent statement. It's something that Rimsky-Korsakov talks about with choir in an orchestral setting. Just have 3 different note values in the first thing, and you can't go wrong. That sort of thing. It's interesting how many people apply it to non-choral works and instrumental works, of which this is one. But of course, it does involve choir later on. So the forces for this are 4 trumpets, 3 trombones, timpani, and various percussion, and then the full orchestra come in later. If it doesn't have the orchestra, the organ will take over from this bit here on that sort of D, which is the dominant of the original key of G major. But it's interesting. It goes on a sort of odd flight of fancy. It's sort of classic. We've got sort of, an augmentation of the initial tuplet figure. It's all root position. I don't think there's any chord that isn't in root position. So in direct contrast to the Copland, which we'll see later, is not all of that at all. But what's really interesting is the various sort of shifts in harmony. So we got to B, and then it goes to B flat, a semitonal shift, and then a progression of fourths, which is interesting. So we got that sort of quartal sort of progression of fourths idea, but it's not quartal in any way. It's all triadic, very much so. It sort of goes to sort of flat 3, flat 7, 4, 1 to G major, which sort of preempts actually the main key. And in fact, it preempts it more than once. So we've got G there, we've got G again, and then G is the final sort of tonic when it cadences. You know, that sort of thing. But like Copland, it does sort of repeat various aspects. So this is the repetition of this chord progression here, which is just the same as the previous augmentation rhythm of that. So it just repeats it. But it does something different. So instead of going to G, it goes to an N harmonic equivalent of the original B major chord. In this case, it's C flat major, but it's a sort of N harmonic shift. And then it does that. So it goes from C flat to A flat. So a sort of very tenuous sort of tertial shift, let's say, because C flat is really a B. But it does go down a minor third, I guess. So there is that. But it's going back to something which we haven't seen before. So here to A flat. So it's sort of a flat 2. And then it goes to E flat. So the only time we hear a second inversion, then a first inversion, and then it's just the dominant with suspension. So supertonic, like that, with an A at the end, if I could play it. So it's quite standard once it gets to it. I suppose the only problematic bit is this bit. So going, which is a really nice progression from this. So it's almost a sort of a dominant of a dominant of a dominant, but it's not quite. It's been flattened. Like that. It's not even a tritone substitution either. It's a sort of really weird one. Although it is a tritone away, but it's not substituting that. Because otherwise it would be a B flat to A flat, and it's not. A sort of interesting thing and a little bit of arpeggiation. I'm not going to dwell too much on it. It's just for me, it was just a sort of really interesting fanfare that sort of works really well in terms of how it's sort of put together. It was written in 1953 for Queen Elizabeth originally to commission. And I'm not sure we can get any better than that for the national anthem, really. It's just sort of motivically interesting, I suppose, but it's not particularly tight. It just does its thing. The air in Copland, on the other hand, is a completely different ballgame. And this one, I think, shows Copland's class, really. I mean, it's an incredible piece of music. Just that opening idea. This sort of double timps, and then it's sort of ritenuto around that, and then the trumpets come in. So it's really interesting reading about Copland, especially this thing which is taken from the Grove's sort of Grove Music Online about Copland, and it mentions these sorts of things. So melodies often feature a short, trenchant motif developed bit by bit in a modular fashion. This is exactly what happens in this piece. But they also mention the piano variations and the 12-tone piano fantasy. Austin suggested is as if Copland wanted to expose the way his mind actually works with musical ideas rather than the stylized finished product of its working. That's a really interesting comment. So that the motive expands with each successive repetition with a sort of additive technique. With this particular one, we got fourths and fifths, which produce quartal and quintal sonorities, which is very much his sort of thing. It also mentions Appalachian Spring, the sort of white note chords as well, and the row for the piano fantasy generates density chromatic harmony. So it's the closest to Williams that I can kind of think of in terms of other contemporaries that he admired, because there's people like Alex North, which really fascinating YouTube thing. I keep revisiting it and then thought, oh, I'm going to have to watch Spartacus again to see what it's all about, and I can see what Williams it means, because it's finding an American guru figure, really. So we start off with a full statement of the percussion timpani at the beginning. Then we have this sort of quartal quintal outline. So sort of dominant, tonic, dominant. And then it goes into an E-flat triadic outline. And it's sort of implied B-flat. So that's really the initial statement. We've got this sort of initial figure, and then we've got these sort of rather strident, let's call them exposed tones down, a sort of arpeggio down. And I wrote here, curiously, this wants to go on. It doesn't sound complete, even though the final two notes of the phrase are an inversion of the opening notes. Like that, F and B flat. I'll put the... always forget to do this. It's because you can't really see the black notes on here. It's ridiculous. Just colour them blue. Why not? You know. Anyway, sort of irritating, but there we go. This is the difference between working on a DAW and working on score with the piano keyboard, and having both of them up and running is really problematic, so I've decided not to. Yeah, it wants to go on. It doesn't sound complete, and it's very clever how he's done that. It's very simple, and I think Copland was very thorough in his thought process. This is almost like a poem. Everything is condensed into the shortest amount of time to say the greatest amount of words or musical thought to express itself, and I think that's really interesting. So we've got B flats, we've got E flat triadic outline, and then it continues. So that's a sort of echo of the initial motif, of course, and a different key. Back to the E flat, like that, and then B flat with wide leaps, which is another facet of Copland's idea. And we can see there's quite a big expansion here. We've got going all the way up to there, almost 2 octaves, like that. Which is quite a wide idea if you think about it. So let's carry on. This is where the horns come in. First time we have a sixth. I'm just going to stop it there again. So here we've got a reprise of the opening. So the trumpets are now joined by horns below them, which are basically harmonizing in dyads the same implicated harmonic outline that we had before. So we've still got sort of B flat until we get to E flats there, which is the same as we had before. Then we have E flat all the way down. Then it's B flat there. Then E flat as well. And this little bit is now a modular expansion of the first idea. So here, in this sort of patch, it just went back to the beginning and then expanded the beginning. This time, with those strident descending chords, it expands those strident descending chords to go upwards slightly. And also it's slightly differently harmonized. So we've got more sixths and a seventh. And there's something very wistful about it. It's sort of prairie. There's something rather magical and beautiful about that. I can just sort of imagine the sort of Great Plains at that point. Very interesting how he manages to encompass that in such a small amount of notes and time. So then we have a reprise back in again of the initial bit here from bars 9 to 10. Slightly changed harmony. We've got that little fifth going on. So very much quartal, quintal. And also it's not all root position, and that's something else which Copland does in this particular thing. Obviously a much, much longer piece, and it's not an introduction to something. It's very differently composed, as we can see. This time the fragment is sort of brought back, so it's almost as if you're putting back this full statement together again with a little jigsaw puzzle of these little bits of rhythm. Now the trombones come in with the tuba with opening material, and this continues as well. So I'll stop it until there probably. So let's carry on. First time we hear C minor. There we go. So this one is a slight bit of imitation now coming in. So this time we've got the timp imitation, which hasn't occurred before. It's just done this sort of, you know, boom, boom, boom. And this time it's imitating the opening source material of this. This time it's in the trombones. And we get a little bit of imitation from the trombones and the, let's call them horns stroke trumpets. Some trombones are joining in actually, so it's just trombone 3 and the tuba, which is retaining that B flat tonality there at that point. But this time we get a different tonality, different sort of chord rather. So C minor, so it's now differently harmonized. And there's a little additive technique going on here. So if we compare that with this, it's identical. That's all identical to that. So the additive technique is now done in the bass instruments. Like that. Another echo of the previous imitation. And then, as before, and it's differently harmonized. Like that as well. For this expansion here, it's slightly different. In fact, for some reason, I forgot to put in those chords. Like that. So let's just rearrange those. Let's see if I can do it reasonably quickly. Whoops. There we go. Done. Yeah, so again, you can see sort of more second inversion stuff as well going on. Then we get interesting voicings happening and also differently harmonized chords as well. So we've got sort of very low brass here. Then it opens up. So it's sort of a convergent progression in the sense that we've got a descending melody and a rising bass. But notice that the gaps here are quite small, and then suddenly they're quite wide. as if it's sort of really opening out. And it's interesting that he opens out those chords on the quartal chord here, that sort of sus2, but let's call it sus2. It could be either, whichever way it's sussed to. It could be an upwardly resolving suspension, which is called a retardation, or downwardly resolving suspension, which is a suspension. So F minor 7 without the fifth, G minor, and then second inversions. Notice there are no horns at that point because he's saving them for the repeat. Repeat more forcefully and with horns with a little codetta of different chords. So here, with D minor and E flat as well. So it's just the same as this, but another little additive moment as well. Really powerful stuff. A remarkable piece. And here we've got a little sort of stretto of the opening material, this time with the trombones and then imitated in the horns and trumpets. And then we have the original E-flat triadic outline, which was this idea, which is now expanded fully. In this case, and it's really interesting, those horns sort of shift from 3-note chords to 2-note chords. So it's just really nicely harmonized. There's a sort of up-down feel. Like that. Sort of up-down. And then a repeated more forcefully. Again, a similar idea to this. There's a very strong logic to all of this. You know, it follows a logical statement of additions and repetition. It's very, very clever in how that's done. And then we have a sudden introduction of A flat, which goes into B flat. That sort of flat 7 to tonic. Sort of another sort of very American thing, which I guess was one of Copland's great sort of contributions to America, really, I think. I mean, not being American, I can't really speak for y'all. And then we got the sort of wonderful pan-diatonic idea. Sort of D flat add 9 going to F. So sort of sudden change at that point. And then a sudden change like that, ending on the 5th of the original or the home key, sort of note 5 rather than note 1 scale degree in this case, which is exactly the same as the other fanfare that we had a look at as well, which I'm now trying to see. Yes, which appears the same time, so written sort of 11 years later, and must have heard it at some point, Gordon. But yeah, it's interesting here. We've got sort of down a major third and then down a minor third, but all major chords and all root position. Notice that the bass has gone to allow enough time for the timp to go, and also it'd be difficult for the tuba as well. So yeah, the only sort of little bit of pan-diatonicism is that chord. like that. Sorry, I was playing a D natural and sort of there, and actually it's a D flat. It's just not obvious, but it is in there. I don't know what I was doing there. It was a sort of really strange thing, like that. And of course we've got a sort of upward major third chord progression as well. So some tertial aspects of there too. But basically it's this sort of quartal quintal idea, which is sort of used really, really fantastically with judicious use of this little seventh. You know, those 6/3 often with so basically all the intervals there is something that sort of characterizes a lot of Copland's work. You know, this sort of quartal stuff is often mixed in with triadic aspects as well. You can't just have quartal things all the way through, or else it doesn't necessarily work in context in this sort of piece. So a wonderful thing, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to introduce us to the other types of fanfare that we see. So you know, I've done the Fox fanfare at the beginning, and I've also done a whole sort of thing on the fanfares here, but I thought we'd look at it in more detail in terms of what fanfare styles do we have, because there's rebel fanfare, but we also have these little sort of you know, types of things going on all the way through Star Wars, all the way through various cues, sort of thinking, well, is there a sort of tradition that it's drawn from? I mean, this is very much has the triadic nature, and also it has this sort of quartal quintal stuff, and it also has the tuplet figures as well. The only real addition are these repeated notes, which we haven't seen in any of the other bits. I suppose that digga-da-da-ba, you know, there is some of that as well. So we do get a little bit of it, but not quite in the same way. So we'll revisit that in the next episode, and then I'll go back to the sort of bubbling strings as well. I just thought it'd be nice to sort of start little strands along and just to revisit some of these again. So thank you for bearing with me, and look forward to the next one.